project I'm going to use a piece of beech. This is off a 3-inch square spindle blank and it's about 4 inches long. One end's off the waxed end. I've removed some of the wax off the centre there so that the step drive I'm going to use to hold this bites into the wood and not the wax. First job is to mount it between centres and turn it round using spindle roughing gouge. Next job is to clean up each end of the piece. So I've got a flat face and obviously get rid of the rest of the sealing wax on this end of the piece. And then I'm going to cut a tenon on each end at 60mm diameter. This tenon's going to be initially used for guiding the thickness of the cuts, as you'll see when we start the off-centre work, and once that work's been completed, one of these will then be turned into a tenon that can mount into a chuck. I've cut the two tenons, and as you may notice I've remounted this with my chuck on the lathe because I need to use the indexing system on the chuck. My lathe doesn't have a built-in one, so I need to use the one on here. I'm going to draw 3 lines now around the piece at 120 degrees between each line, and that will be the start of marking out where we put the off-centre locations on each end. I'm now going to take the piece out of the chuck and transfer these marks across to the ends of the piece. We've now got each of the lines marked from the sides. I've just taken a light cut across the ends of these on the bandsaw just to take the excess pieces off where the step centres were, just so we've got a smoother surface to work from. I'm now going to draw these lines from these 3 points to the centre. I'm now going to measure out 15mm along each of these lines, which will be the points that we use for doing the off-centre turning. Now I'm just going to put a centre punch hole in each of those. I need to number these up. There's various ways that people number these. I basically go 1, 2 and 3 on this end. Then on the opposite end we're going to mount on the next one round. So this is number 1. So this is number 1 hole here. So I'm going to mount onto that one. So this is number 1 at this end. Similarly, number 2 comes around and this is number 2, and the final hole obviously number 3. We'll then remount this on the lathe with the step centres at each end on hole number 1 on each end to get the first off centre piece. I've now remounted the piece between step centres with the number 1 holes. Because of the fact that it's off centre, the step centres tend to dig in on 1/2 of the, or probably about 1/3 of the teeth, so make sure they are properly embedded into the wood. Turn this at around 500 RPM, no faster, with the fact that it's off centre. It is unbalanced, and if this does come away, you don't be turning at high speed. Also make sure you're using a face shield when you're doing this as a minimum. I've also put a pencil mark around the edge of these tenons. They make it a little bit more visible to see when you're turning, and make sure that you turn the piece fully round and that it's not going to hit you to a rest when you're turning. First thing I'm going to do is actually turn the piece in a straight line to take these corners off on each side down to the point where they're level with these tenons. I'm going to use 3/8 inch bowl gouge for this, as I prefer using that when I'm doing off centre turning. Once I've got those down to that level mark, I'm then going to curve the centre part of the piece. Once that's done, I will move the piece round onto the number 2 centres and then the number 3 centres, repeating the turning process on each of them. So that's the piece basically turned. You can measure the depth, as long as you don't move the tool rest, you can measure the depths through to the centre on each setting if you wish. I tend to just do it by eye now. What you find is it's quite easy to get tool marks in the piece. I've left them in at the moment here just to show you as you go through, because you're cutting off centre and you're only touching the wood a small amount, your tool can bounce and you can get tool marks and tear out. What you need to do is a very fine, slow cut to get a good finishing cut on this, and if you've still got odd little marks in, you can usually get rid of them using sandpaper or abrasive paper. So the next stage on this will be to sand it. You can't do that while it's rotating, obviously, so you'll sand by hand on each of the pieces, each of the sides, to get it down to the grit that you want. Took a couple of finishing cuts to remove those tool marks that I was showing you, and then I've remounted this between centres and I've sanded this to 400 grit. Next stage on this end of the piece is I'm going to reduce this tenon size down to one that will fit in a set of my jaws. In this instance I'm using a set of 40mm O'Donnell jaws, but obviously you need to cut the tenon to the size that suits the jaws that you have. Once I've done that, I'll reverse the piece round and mount it in the chuck. I've remounted the piece in the chuck now. Next step is to remove this tenon at this end, so I'm just going to do that with a spindle gouge, take it down to the base point here, and then we need to hollow the inside of the box out. Lots of different ways you can do that, different tools you can do that with. What I'm going to do to start with is take some of the wood out with a Forstner bit, 1.25 inch one. It's difficult to actually measure the diameter of a piece that's been turned like this, so go undersized to start with if you're using a Forstner bit, and then open the box out and you'll be able to feel the wall thickness as you go down. The problem with Forstner bits when you're doing boxes is they give you a very flat bottom, that way, and then you get the tip as a small hole in the bottom of the box, which can be quite difficult to actually get rid of. So I'm going to go part way down with this, and then I'm just going to use the normal drill bit with the standard angle on the point, and that's a lot easier to hollow out either as a curved bottom to the box or flatten it out once you've got to that point. I'm going to hollow most of this out using Simon Hope carbide tool. This is the 10mm version on the square bar. Finished hollowing the inside of the box out now, and I've sanded that to 400 grit. Final thing we're going to do on this part of the box is just slope this edge in towards the centre a little bit. Then when we fit a lid on that, it will sit round on that nice and easily, and we don't have to worry about trying to get it flat onto this small edge. Once I've shaped that, I'll just sand that piece, and then this stage of the box will be finished. What we'll do then is I'll make the lid for the box before I take the chucking point off the base. Then if there's anything we need to alter on this, we can still put this back into the chuck. I'm going to make the lid out of a piece of laburnum to give a contrasting colour to the beech. So first job is to mount this between centres and turn this round, and then I'm going to put a tenon on one end that will fit into the 40mm jaws on my chuck. I've now mounted this in the chuck. This will be the bottom of the lid. What I'm going to do first is put another 40mm tenon on this end, which I'll be using to hold the lid when I turn it round to shape the top. I'll then cut down a section to the right diameter to fit into the box. Once I've done that, I can then turn the rest of this section down to the right diameter for the shape of the lid. Once I got to that stage, I'll turn the piece round and mount it in the chuck the opposite way around, then I'll shape the top of the lid. Once I've finished shaping the lid, I'll then sand, finish the lid, and then part it off from the chucking point. I finished the lid off, so I sanded it on the lathe, finished it with some chestnut cellulose sanding sealer and Hampshire sheen high gloss wax, then parted it off and finished the underside. Then put the box back onto the lathe and finished that with, again, cellulose sanding sealer and high gloss wax. The inside's easy to do on the lathe. Because of the shape of the outside, it's not particularly easy to polish that, so I used a buffing wheel just to polish that up. What I'm now going to do is mount this on the lathe so we can remove the chucking point on the bottom. What I'm going to do is use a very simple jam chuck that I've turned out of a scrap of wood that will fit inside the box. Now, because I've finished the box, I don't want the wood potentially scratching the inside, so what I've done is turn the jam chuck slightly undersized and then put masking tape around it, which will protect it. Also means you don't have to be too accurate when you're making your jam chuck, because you can then alter the size using the masking tape. Now I'm going to bring the tailstock up to here just to check that this is centered okay, and we'll leave it there whilst we remove the bulk of the spigot off the end, and then we'll take it away as I finish the bottom of the box. What I'm going to do is just curve these points out slightly so that when the box sits, it will sit on a ring effectively around the full circumference and not try and sit on these 3 points. And then I'll dish the base of the box in slightly again so you've got a proper seating, and then we'll just sand it and finish that off as I've done the rest of the box. And here we have the finished pot. Normally, if I'm turning a pot, when I get to a stage when I've drilled the centre part out, I'll take the wood inside for a few weeks, weigh it and wait until it's dried out, and acclimatise to the inside temperature, because there's usually a little bit of shrinkage. So I dare say that when I take this inside, it will shrink and either the lid will tighten up or loosen up. I've made this with a lid that's not a pot fit. It's nice and easy to pull off. It doesn't rattle at all. This is a little trinket pot. You don't want the lid popping and everything flying out all over the place. You don't have to make a box out of this type of shape. You could finish at this stage without a lid on it, make nice pen pots, or if you don't want to hollow it out, you can set a tea light holder into the top of that and make a quite nice tea light stand. There'll be some close-up pictures coming at the end of this. If you found the video useful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I hope you found it useful. Thank you for watching. Bye.